Hi, I'm Dr. Abena Asantewaa. When I was teaching college level psychology classes, I used to like to give my students what I called a 50-cent word, a big word that they could go and show off to their friends and let them know that they had really been to college. So our 50-cent word for today is disproportionality. Big word. What does it mean? Why should you care about it? Disproportionality is defined by the National Association of School Psychologists as a group's representation in a particular category that exceeds expectations for that group or differs substantially from the representation of others in that category. Special education disproportionality has been referred to as the extent to which membership in a given group affects the probability of being placed in a specific disability category. Disciplinary disproportionality encompasses the disproportionately high rates at which students from certain racial or ethnic groups are subjected to office discipline referrals, suspensions, school arrests, and expulsions. So these are representing some of the problems that our Black boys are having in the school systems. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit. Black boys are represented in higher than expected numbers in severe disciplinary actions like suspension. You can be suspended in an in-school setting so that you go to a particular room and you stay there rather than being in your classroom. Or you can be suspended with an out-of-school suspension, which means that you're not allowed back in school for a certain number of days. You're at home and not able to participate in the class for that amount of time. Black boys as young as kindergarten are being expelled from school. They are disproportionately represented in special education, especially in two different categories. The first one is for emotional disorders. They're labeled as having emotional disability at a much higher rate than you would expect for the number of our population. I've seen cases where boys had behavior problems, and yes, they were misbehaving in school, but they weren't out of control. They didn't have emotional problems. They had behavior problems. But because people did not know what to do with them in the regular education classroom, they were referred for special education and placed in classes where the academic expectations were much lower and the entire focus was on their behavior, not on their academic progress. The second area where they are in special education in higher numbers is what we call intellectual disability. We used to call that mental retardation. That's not a nice term anymore. So it's being called intellectual disability. That means that they are not expected to learn at the rate that average children would learn. And so again, they're often put in a special classroom. The expectations are much lower. They're not keeping up with the state standards for what should be accomplished at that particular grade level. And I've seen boys who were labeled as being intellectually disabled when in fact there maybe was one part of their learning that was slower, but they were perfectly capable in other areas. But because the teachers and the psychologists who were labeling them didn't know what to look for or did not understand them, they were placed in classes where they would never catch up and would not get an academic diploma. If they finished high school, they would not get the same diploma that a child in a regular education class would get. They're overrepresented in what's called the school to prison pipeline. That's a metaphorical path that leads from school to prison. And it starts as early as third and fourth grade, disciplinary actions, Sometimes even not behavioral problems. I remember a student being referred to the correction officer that was in that school because they didn't tuck their uniform shirt into their pants, and that was an infraction. And they might be referred to the juvenile justice system if they had a certain number of infractions. So, as early as third and fourth grade, boys are being labeled as being on track to go to prison by the time they're grown. And in fact, they do end up in prison at a disproportionately higher rate. Then our boys are underrepresented in the gifted and talented classes. Even when they have exceptional intelligence and ability, often that's not recognized by the teacher, and they're not included in these classes for children that have extra abilities and who are given more challenge and the ability to really explore what they're capable of doing. Later on in school, like in high school, they are underrepresented in advanced placement classes, which are the courses that are much more strictly uh, there for the college bound students. The curriculum is stricter, it's harder, they're doing a higher level of work frequently at the college level, but you don't find very many Black boys in those classes either. So our boys are in school, but they are not often being seen as they are. Someone else is interpreting their behavior or their ability in ways that affects their future prospects. And this is something for us to all be concerned about. And I'll be talking about all of these areas in more depth as we go along. But that's why we're looking at disproportionality, and that's why I hope you will care about it. This is the Black Boy Advocate.